Hey guys, it's Chelsea with KYOH Designs. Thanks for joining us again. We're doing a Milky Way tumbler today. And these are the supplies I use for the Milky Way part. I will link them in the bio. Starting out with a already prepped tumbler doing the epoxy method. So I start with my first glitter at the top, and I'm going to go down this tumbler at an angle while I'm twisting it. So you kind of want to make a swirl effect with your glitters. I do a couple of coats, and I start where I start at the top and I finish at the bottom will almost meet, but they won't overlap, if that makes sense. So when you look at the tumbler on the side, you will see where they start and stop will almost meet. When I go in with my next color, I'm just going to go straight up against that first color. If it mixes in and it blends in, that's great. It won't matter. If you have kind of jagged edges or they're not really straight all the way, it's perfectly fine. It won't even matter because we're doing a Milky Way on top of this tumbler, so it's not going to matter. But here I am making sure I have good coverage. So I'm applying glitter a couple layers. And then I'm doing the same with my third glitter. This glitter is a chunky, so I just go straight up against that second glitter there. And if you have more glitter on the bottom than you do on the top, that's perfectly fine. The tumbler is smaller at the bottom, so your space is going to be a little bit smaller to work with versus the top. And then here I am with my fourth glitter, again going straight up against that glitter that I used before. You kind of want it to blend a little bit. If it doesn't blend, that's perfectly fine. You're going to have that Milky Way going over it. And then I also use a fifth glitter on this one because I have just a little thin strip here and I'm using a fine. And it's going to blend in my black and my pinks here. So I just make sure I get the good coverage and go back over it until I feel like I've covered enough. And I'm using this fine on the bottom just because I don't want to really mess with the chunky glitter on the bottom of the cup. And then I'm just going to shake off all the excess here. And then I just kind of peek around and make sure everything looks perfect. And there you go. So that is the start of our tumbler. This is the swirl part that we just created with these glitters. So now I'm going to put on my epoxy. And I'm using Mr. Nola's Glass Coat Epoxy here. If you haven't checked them out, I would highly suggest you do. It is my favorite epoxy to use. But I usually do 2 coats of epoxy after this method because I don't want any bumps or glitter poking up to ruin the flow of my Milky Way. So I'm just going to speed up the process here. Okay, so now we're going to sand this tumbler down. I've cut out the audio, so excuse that, please. So see how there's little glitter poking up? When I put the epoxy on this, the glitter just really wanted to pop up out of this, the chunky pieces. So what I'm going to do is I have these flush cutters here. You can find them at the hardware store or on Amazon. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to cut out the chunky pieces that are sticking up. I find this easier to do so it doesn't rip your sandpaper or it doesn't rip your sanding block, whatever you're using. And it makes it a lot easier. You can also use fingernail clippers. I've seen people use those as well. Perfectly fine. So I'm going to just finish up cutting all these little jagged pieces off. So now I'm going to take my sanding block here. You can use regular sandpaper, whatever your heart desires. And I'm just going to sand the tumbler down. And I'm using a 120 grit sandpaper. So I'm just going to sand the rest of this tumbler down, make sure my bottom edges are nice and smooth. And then I'm going to make sure all that glitter that was poking up is no longer there. And then once I'm done sanding, you can see how smooth it is. I take these tack cloths that I get from Home Depot. They come 2 or 3 in a pack, and they're really big, so I normally just cut them in smaller sections. But I use that to get all the dust off my tumblers before I go wash them, because I don't want to be tracking all this dust through my house of where I have to wash my tumblers. So I get use this to get all the dust off, and they work great. So here is the end result of our tumbler after it is sanded. So I usually go in at the top with a Dremel, and you can use a sandpaper to sand your rims down, but I go in with a Dremel to make sure that this is nice and flat. And I'm not going to do that step here to show you. I'll create a different video on that. So now we're ready for our Milky Way. So for my Milky Way, I am going to be using 3 different Micas and a black epoxy dye. The Micas I used are the white is a silver white. It is from Amazon. There is a raspberry color, and it is from Just For You Online is where that one's from. The hot pink mica is from Magic Moon Micas. And then the black epoxy dye is from Michaels. I just bought it at Michaels. The epoxy that I'm using here is Mr. Nola's Speed Dry. It's a fast setting epoxy. I really like to use this for my Milky Ways because it sets up quicker and it doesn't have time to run. I've had trouble with my Milky Ways in the past where it just starts to run. And I found by using this, it's easier for me to kind of get that control over the Milky Way being used. So after I mix up all my micas, what I'll do is I will start actually with the darkest color first, because I don't want to put light colors on and then my dark colors mix in with those. So here I am adding some epoxy into my little cup here. And then just mixing up all my mica powders. So you want to make sure when you mix your mica powders too that you're mixing them thoroughly so you don't have little clumps in them or any powder, because when you put that on your cup, that will show, and you don't want that. You don't want that to be on there. We don't want clumps. And when I use this epoxy dye, I'm only going to use like 3 drops of this. I want it to be opaque. I don't want it to be like see-through. So what you'll see me do is when I'm mixing it up, make sure you shake it very well too. When I'm mixing it in there, so see there's only 3 little drops there. Very, very little amount. When you're mixing it up, you kind of just want to pull it up and look and make sure that you can't see your mixer on it. So if you can see your mixer through the epoxy, then you may want to add a little bit more. So here I am just kind of checking to make sure that it is opaque enough for me. Okay, so I put down my first layer of epoxy for this Milky Way. So you're just going to put a base layer of epoxy down first. And this is going to help get your mica and your inks or whatever to flow on the tumbler. And you don't need a lot. You just need very little amount. I think I mixed for this entire process with the micas and this layer here, I mixed a total of 30 milliliters of epoxy. So that's all it took. It was the 30 ml, and that is for my cup sitting there on the side and then what I'm putting on here. So I started at the bottom and I kind of worked my way up. As you can see, I really kind of just used all the 30 mLs that I had here. And I was kind of running a little bit low, so this is getting a real thin layer here, which is perfectly fine. You don't need that much. Now, if you wanted your Milky Way to flow a lot more, I would suggest using more epoxy in your flow layer. If you don't want them to run a lot, then I would keep it as thin as you can. So I'm just going to make sure that that is spread all over the cup and I didn't miss any spots. And I'm trying to scrape as much epoxy out of this cup that I can just to make sure that I'm getting it all over this cup. Okay, so since black is my darkest color, I'm going to use this one first. So I start at the top and I go down at an angle with the swirl. And you can go bottom to top or top to bottom. For the direction my cup is turning, I'm going top to bottom. And there's no rhyme or reason how you have to put your stripes on here or your colorants. It's however you prefer. I put some in the dark colors, some in the light colors. I wanted a lot of black on this, so I kind of put the black in almost every color here. And then I'm putting them in thin lines. Make sure you get the bottom as well. I'm putting them in thin lines because I will go back later and try to disperse it more to make it not look as stringy looking, which you'll see later on. So I'm just making sure that I have all the coverage I want going back over. And you don't have to keep, reaching for it. Just if you missed a spot, wait for your cup to just come right back around. It'll turn and come right back to you, to the spot that you need. So you don't have to go chasing it. And then, okay, so I'm just going back through and touching up where I feel like it should be necessary. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. So I'm going in with my next color is the raspberry. It is my next darkest color. And I'm going to put it directly in some of the glitter spots here. And it's okay if you can't see this on the camera. You'll see it later when I show you the tumbler. This raspberry was kind of more opaque. And I only put it in a few spots because I didn't really want that much of this color. So now I'm going to go in with my hot pink here. And this color is the color that I wanted the most of, so this hot pink and the black. So you're going to see me put most of this hot pink and the black on. And this hot pink really popped out against this pink color right here. Again, you're just going to put it on in these thin lines here, and this speed dry epoxy is really helping keep it where it needs to be. It's not spreading out a lot, which I really like. It is a lot thicker of an epoxy than I'm used to, so which is why I use this. It keeps it from spreading a lot. So I'm just going in back over some of my stripes, just kind of flatten them out a little bit, and adding a little bit more of this pink. So I'm trying to just give it a little bit more definition now and just flatten down these pink stripes here, just to get it to spread a little bit so I can get it a little bit more defined of the pink dominance before I put this white in next. Because I'm only going to use a little tiny bit of white on this cup. I want more of the pink and the black. So now I'm going in with the white, and the white mica actually has a silver tinge to it, which is the reason why I used it mainly instead of a white epoxy dye, because I have this silver glitter on the cup and I wanted it to match. If you wanted a more of a white color, then I would have used a white epoxy dye. So I only go in with a little bit of this white here. I'm going to put some here at my silver. So I didn't want too much of this because I didn't want it to overtake the pink and the black color. So I'm only going to use a little bit as kind of like just the accent of it. And then I'm just going through and I'm putting it like halfway down, and then I'll go back around and put it more on the top part of it as well. So here I'm going back in with my pink just because I want to establish more of the pink lines. The rule of thumb is you can always start with less and add more, but you can never take away. If I wanted to take away, I'd have to wipe it off, and then it would all smudge and be a nasty mess. So I'm going back in with some of this pink. I'm going to add a little bit more just to get a little bit more defined pink colors here. And when I do my Milky Ways, they're not really planned out. It's just more of a we're going to wing it type method. Just because when we do try to plan out, it doesn't go as planned. So I'm going to go in back in with a little bit more black just to kind of separate this pink out. I really enjoy doing these Milky Ways because they kind of change so much during the process. And there's different things you can add to make them change, or different things that you can do. So I got a little bit more black here, and it's all kind of gooping together. So What I'm going to do afterwards, after I finish putting what I want left on here, I'm going to put a glove on, and I'm actually going to take my hand and kind of spread out those lines, which you'll see here in a little bit. So I'm still just trying to get a little bit more black centered here on these focal points. So I'm just going to let it spin for a minute, get my glove on my hand, and then I'm going to start with the black, and I take my finger and I just kind of smoosh it down, spread it out so it's not like the stringy look from me applying it. This kind of just flattens down your epoxy line there, your little black lines that you created. So I'm going to go in with my black, and then I'm going to change my finger, and then I'm going to do the same with the pink. And then I'm going to take my other finger and do the silver parts, and then kind of ran out of fingers here. So I really like doing the smush part. It kind of flattens out your lines that you created and doesn't make them look more defined. Kind of just gives it a little bit of a natural flow look. And at this point, my epoxy was setting up pretty good now. Using this fast set, you have a 30-minute working span. And if your room is pretty warm, I find that working span goes a little bit quicker, just because it is reacting to the heat faster. Heat is making it activate a lot quicker than normal. So that is it. I'm going to stop touching it. I think I'm happy with the desired look at where it is now. And this is going to be the final look of it. So once you're done with that, you're just going to let it continue to dry. And, oh, sorry, I am not done. I forgot about this part. So I add on some holographic stars from Painted Valley Designs, PVD glitter. I'll link them in the bio. So I'm adding some hollow stars here. And then I'm also going to add a glitter called Angel Blade. It is a silver and hollow chunky mix. So I'm just adding this to kind of give it a little bit more pizzazz and bring out some of that silver. You can use your silicone brush to kind of separate the glitter if it gets a little clumpy, which is what I'm doing here. Some of my stars kind of stuck together. Okay, so now this is the finished outcome. So here we are putting this glitter on, and you can see it right here. It's called Angel Blade. So I just sprinkle this on with my hands. I don't dump it on. I don't use a spoon. I just pick it up, pinch it in my fingertips, and sprinkle it on wherever I want to put it. It's totally up to you. Be creative with it. I don't want to overload it though, which is why I'm taking it in little bitty pinches. Okay, so now we have our glitter on there. and we have the desired look that we want. The epoxy set, our Milky Way is not going to run anywhere. So now our next step of this tumbler is to add the next layers of epoxy. And you can go back in with your silicone brush to touch up. I just use it to kind of separate some of those glitters apart so they weren't clumping on top of each other again. But the next step of this is going to be to finish out with our layers of epoxy. So once this is dry, which in this case, this epoxy dries in 2 hours, I will then go in with another layer of epoxy just to kind of get it smoothed out. And then at that point, if I wanted to add any decals to it, I would add my decals then, but I want to keep this tumbler as is. So here is the finished outlook. And I really love the colors I chose. And when this is taken outside, it really just kind of glows and pops. And here's our final photos. Thanks for watching.